Well, it's just so fun and exciting to be having Sesshin in our place, isn't it? Yeah, wow. Welcome to those who are a little newer to our temple, and we have a few folks who were quite involved in creating it, who are just now finally getting to see it in action. And I know some folks stayed home because the health got shaky, so hope it's working fine to be home too. Here at the close of our first practice period in our new temple, thank you to Ken for holding down the seat, which is pretty much your main job, is to sit there. You're doing good. That's what the job title is. Head seat. Sit here. And you do good when you open your mouth too. And I was deeply struck by what the first little sutra that Ken shared with us back at the beginning. A sutra which might be pronounced something like Ugra Parichara Sutra. You remember that, where the layperson Ugra asked the Buddha how do lay people practice and how do monastics practice, and it did seem like a great thing to look at to examine Ken's central question for us. What does the serious practice of somebody living in the world, living as a layperson, look like? And it just continues to resonate in me how strongly the Buddha emphasized take refuge. Take refuge. Remember Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Take refuge. Recollect taking refuge. Practice taking refuge. Taking refuge again and again. We do a little verse in the morning, short service in the early morning practice online, which not all of you are able to come to, I know. That ends with something like remembering Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha on every breath. So it's just like that. And how he says in that sutra, it doesn't just mean a goal or something to hold up high, something beautiful to think about and cheer yourself up for a minute. It's not just about being devoted to Buddhism or practice. It's a kind of a deeper engagement. Thich Nhat Hanh's translation has the Buddha saying, when you take refuge in the Buddha, you must truly want to become Buddha. You should feel, I take refuge in you, I want to become just like you. I want to be a Buddha adorned with the 32 beautiful signs. And he says that we shouldn't settle, Thich Nhat Hanh says, we shouldn't settle for wanting to hold the hem of the Buddha's robe. And of course, the way we understand such a thing is not that we want to become something else called Buddha, but remember our own Buddha nature, our own Buddhahood, deeply living through it fully. And that regardless of our lifestyle, this is a big commitment to make. Just diving in that completely. It made me think a little like when you have kids, and I know maybe just half of us or so have had children, so you can imagine, if you haven't, analogous things in your life, where that baby pops out and you realize in a flash of wonder and maybe a little bit of shock and horror too, that your life has radically changed, right? That your agenda is now in the back seat for at least a couple of decades, if not forever, And the way our agenda, although it has plenty of wholesome and healthy aspects to it, there's this little central me in there, right? What I want, what I need, that gets stretched, sometimes a lot, by parenting. And I think it's the same with practice. We're willing to let that little me in the middle get stretched, and sometimes stressed, challenged, also delighted, that there's a bigger picture to our life than the story of me. Even as much as I've tried to clean up the story of me and improve the story of me and make it a better, more generous, kinder, more wholesome story of me, it's still the story of me. So this taking refuge in Buddha is pivoting that story to the story of Buddha, the story of, in the case of children, these little Buddhas and all the things they need from you. So it is actually, no matter how you do this practice, whether you call it monastic practice or lay practice, there's this renunciation right in the center, isn't there? And we mostly are not really fond of this word, renunciation. It sounds very dramatic and it sounds very literally monastic. You know, the monastics renounce stuff like having money or much choice over where they live or their schedule, right? They go off to the monastery. But actually, everyone practices renunciation. Parents practice renunciation. Employees, practice renunciation. Go to school, you're practicing renunciation. If you get a body, you're practicing renunciation. So you don't get all the things that you think you want or think you need. So maybe in a way this sutra is not clarifying, but telling us that regardless, lay or monastic, it's a big thing to practice the Buddha way. And you can't it's not a half measures kind of deal. Just always seemed true to me about Zen practice, and much as we made an enormous effort to build a bigger zendo, it's probably not all going to be filled all the time, right? For a good reason, This is something. And I think, we're very welcoming. We get that feedback consistently, which makes me so happy. But I think you come in here, you feel it, oh, whether you have language for that or not. This isn't just, oh, you can meditate a little bit and calm down and feel a little better. There's something transformational means to turn, right? There's something deeply turning in our lives, and maybe some element that can be a little bit disturbing or threatening sometimes, like maybe there's no going back, right? You can't unturn. You can't unrealize the things that you realize or unthink the thoughts you have through practice. Like, oh. And how lucky we are, and this also seems true in lay and monastic life. One would never take this up on your own, right? That would be insane. Way too hard. People do, and there is a term in the tradition for the rare individuals that can somehow take this up on their own. These are the Pratyeka Buddhas, the self-awakening students who somehow just go off in the woods or something and just sit till their brains explode and they come back as Buddhas. And I've met a few people who are a little bit like that, but mostly they're like us, I think. Like, oh yeah, I need help. I need support. We got to do this together. So we don't just take refuge in Buddha. We take refuge in Sangha, of course, as well. And Sangha is wonderfully particular and also oddly universal. Because here we have a particular collection of people, but the particular collection is also always changing. People appear and disappear, and that's just part of Sangha life. Whether we've been together for 30 years or are just meeting today, we are completely in Sangha together right now. Helping each other, challenging each other. I guess the good thing about Sangha is, even if you never had biological kids, and now you are both a child and have like 100 kids, and 100 parents at the same time, And whichever ones are going to be at home when you get there, being here, will vary, So thinking more about taking refuge, I was flipping through the new collection of Suzuki Roshi teachings. And this is the main text that Raisla and her colleagues at Green Gulch are studying as well, she told me. The new little book called Becoming Yourself. I've gone on and on about how much I love the title. Becoming Yourself. Isn't that a great way to think about practice? Becoming yourself. Question is, what self is that? So Suzuki Roshi, as you know, is pretty quirky and sometimes a little bit hard to kind of track what he's saying, besides these little gems that pop up and blow your mind and then you forget them again. But they have a little chapter by him about taking refuge that holds together pretty well. I took out a few paragraphs myself. But that's okay, they edited him, so I'll edit their edit just a little bit, just to make it a little shorter. So here's a little chapter from Suzuki Roshi. What does it mean to take refuge? To take refuge in Buddha means to become one with Buddha, or to find our true nature, which is not different from Buddha. Dogen Zenji uses a phrase, Kanno Doko, which means responsive communion. Kanno Doko, responsive communion. It's a difficult phrase to translate. Kanno means to respond to each other, and Doko means true relationship. Do is for Tao, so the way, the path. Interrelationship, true relationship on the path, responding to each other on the path. In terms of our conscious awareness, Kanno Doko happens to us in this way. We feel some coherence, some interrelationship, some correspondence between Buddha and ourselves. Although we feel that way originally, there is no difference between Buddha nature and human nature. So it is more than responsive communion or relationship, but in our conscious awareness it feels like that. By mutual communion or Kanno Doko, we mean true experience of Zen. It's not some ecstasy or mysterious state of mind, but it is a deep joy. It's a deep joy that is even more than joy. You may have this true experience through some change in your mental state. So you may have a change in your mental state. But a change in mental state is not strictly speaking enlightenment. Enlightenment is more than that. A change in mental state comes with it, but it is more than that. The part we experience is the joy of a mysterious experience, but something else follows. That something which follows aside from this experience is true enlightenment. So let's hear that paragraph again. So the Kanno Doko is the true experience of Zen, not just an ecstasy or a mysterious state of mind, a deep joy, but more than joy. A true experience with some change in your mental state, but beyond your mental state. That's enlightenment, more than that. Maybe included, but more than that. The part that we experience is the joy of a mysterious experience, and something else follows. That something which follows, aside from this experience, is true enlightenment. Suzuki Roshi goes on. So you should not suppose that enlightenment, even though it is there, will be experienced in terms of your consciousness. By carrying out your various activities, the experience becomes deeper. Your consciousness becomes more and more mature and smooth. You may say that enlightenment is the maturity of your experience of everyday life. So this sounds like lay life. Enlightenment is the maturity of your experience of everyday life. When enlightenment does not follow, your experience feels black and white. But true experience follows your conscious activity. The way you receive and use it is more natural, more smooth, and deep. It's not just joy, more than joy. It may not be possible to experience or name enlightenment in terms of consciousness, but what you do experience is deeper than joy. This point should always be remembered. If you remember this point, all the precepts are there. You will not be attached to some particular experience. You'll not be caught by a dualistic experience, good or bad, self or others. And then he ends this little section with a metaphor. Namu, or to take refuge. So remember taking refuge in Buddha, so that's Namu, to take refuge. In Japanese means to plunge in. To plunge into something. And we say, quote, you cannot bring up water in a basket. So he's translating some Japanese aphorism. You cannot bring up water in a basket. If you put the basket on the water, the basket will sink. This is the way. As long as you're making a dualistic effort, you are a basket and you can't do anything because you're full of holes. You're full of holes. The holes are you. We say murochi, wisdom with no holes. Mu is no, right? Murochi, wisdom with no holes. But our actual wisdom is whole wisdom. Whole, like a hole in something. H hole. Wisdom with holes. Murochi means no holes wisdom, but for us, no holes wisdom is just to dip a basket in the water. While it's in the water, there are no holes. That is Namu, to take refuge. That is how we practice Zazen. This is the interpretation of precepts and the understanding of our Zazen. This is a wild metaphor if you think about it. So first of all, we're always trying to do something in a way that doesn't quite work, right? That's the source of pervasive human suffering. So instead of getting a bucket to draw the water, we take a basket full of holes and stick it in the water. And maybe our intention is to scoop up some of that water and put it somewhere else, right? To manipulate, to change things, to make everything better with our basket. And you try to do that, and you're like, ah, shit, right? You know, this doesn't work. But the really important part here, which just really struck me, is if you just leave it in the water, there's no holes, right? Right? The holes are the action of the water falling through them. There are no holes when that's not happening. So there's a wholesomeness to letting ourselves be ourselves, right? Letting our basket just sink into the water. And I think it's humble, right? It's vulnerable. It's letting go of effort, you know. But it's also whole, W-H-O-L-E, whole, right? To really be the water, to immerse ourselves in our lives. So we don't need to pull the basket out of the water. We can let it be just as it is, without struggle. Just be basket, just be water. So I thought that was a great metaphor for our practice. He also said much more succinctly some other time, when you are you, Zen is Zen. That's the same thing, isn't it? You know, just being yourself. And of course that requires much exploration for the rest of our lives. What does it mean to be ourselves, you know? Fully ourselves. What does it mean to be Buddha? And how do we orient? How do we know how to get to this home place, this true self, this Buddha self? It's a journey, isn't it? We're all on this journey. We're on this journey together. Sometimes I visualize like a bunch of people walking along on parallel paths. You know, they wander, and sometimes one path goes up a hill and one goes down the valley. So there's times you can't see anybody else, right? And you think you're all alone, but then you see everybody again, and then you go off over here, and then you find them again, and they find you again. It's a little bit like that in Sangha, I think, right? Sometimes we're pulling together. We can see each other. Other times we're like, what the hell happened, you know? But we just keep going. Somehow finding our way together to our true home. I thought of another metaphor myself. And I'm into nature, right? So it's a nature metaphor. And maybe you've heard this incredible story. So on the coast of Northern California are the headwaters of the Klamath River, which flows down from southwestern Oregon. The river is about 250 miles long to its headwaters. And like so many western rivers, the Klamath was dammed multiple places for hydroelectricity, for flood control, for agricultural diversion, just because humans, pretty much male humans, need to control everything, right? And it's not a river in that frame, right? It's a source of water and power and control. And these dams went in the early 1900s, over 100 years ago, just over. And the Klamath, like most of the western American watersheds, was an important salmon place. And this particular river was a particularly important one because the habitat is quite intact. If you think about northwestern California and southwestern Oregon. There's no big metro areas, right? There's lots of mountains. We're going up by Mount Shasta on I-5. This is further west than that. So it's a really good habitat, and so it's really good for the salmon. A really complex ecological area. Now it has wilderness areas, it has plenty of logging lands, but not too messed up, pretty good shape. And as you know, I'm sure, salmon spawn in the freshwater, are born in the freshwater, and then after a while they swim out in the ocean where they live most of their lives. And then they come back. They come back to where they were born to give birth themselves, to lay eggs and fertilize eggs, and then they die and complete the cycle and give their bodies to the forest. Often far from the coast. We're blessed here in Bellingham having a bunch of small salmon streams, which don't go hundreds of miles, but still the salmon swim upstream. And if you haven't been in touch with that, I think maybe we should all go. I think the run's just kind of finished for the year, but Squalicum Creek right below us, the word squalicum is for a Coast Salish word for salmon, for chum or dog salmon. And there's some salmon that return right down there, by the road, So anyway, this was a tragedy, right, for the salmon that probably nobody but the, native population even noticed, And of course they did notice. And for the next 100 years, they worked on it. I don't know all the story of how they did that. But somehow, after decades of activism, and maybe eventually finding a more receptive climate in California and Oregon than there was originally to taking care of our planet, the dams were removed just a year and a half ago. 4 major dams at the mouth and just a little bit inland from the mouth of the Klamath. They were removed at the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024. So for 100 years, the salmon couldn't go into 250 miles of great habitat. And then on October 16th, 2024, all the way up there in Oregon, 230 miles of river from the headwaters, the very first season, very first year that it was possible, adult Chinook salmon appeared. How did they know, right? How did they get back there that quickly? Like, okay, we can go home again. So I looked this up, and biologists think salmon navigate kind of with a combination of 2 things. The big picture navigation out in the ocean is actually magnetic. They have some kind of internal magnetic sort of compass. They can sense the magnetic fields of the planet and go the right direction back towards their home waters. And then once they get close, they smell the water and find their way to right where they were born. And Chinook salmon, there's 4 or 5 species, but Chinook live 3 to 7 years. So this 100 years is maybe 15 or 20 generations, of not going there, of not smelling those waters. Doesn't it just make you cry? Like, wow. So somehow they kept that knowing alive, in their salmon community for 20 generations. Just as we were trying to keep the memory of our home place with Buddha alive after, I forget what, 90-something generations, depending on how you count them. Our generation counts a little more made up, but it's still beautiful. Somehow they remembered and found their way home. So I think it's more like that than figuring this out, don't you think? Sure, we got to try to figure it out. It's how we're wired. We'll read the books. We'll go to the classes. We'll think and overthink, Am I doing this right? How much should I go? What does it mean to do serious practice as a layperson? I'm sure Ken did a little sniffing, but he also got out the books. So did we. So this is the heart part, right? The heart part of us. The salmon reminding us that the brilliant innovation in the Asian languages that are rooted in Chinese is they stuck to one character. It's a lovely little flowy character, Shin, kokoro in modern Japanese, that means both mind and heart. So it's our heart mind that goes home to Buddha. Our mind heart. And where does it live? In the body. Our body mind heart that swims home. And the creation of this temple was also a kind of swimming home, and it's especially true for me, myself, and many of us. Not an easy journey, but a joyful one. Confusing, delightful, intuitive, surprising. Now that it's done, I can publicly admit something. I thought that this design for the Zenda was ridiculous. Like, that's way too much. This is too complicated. We can't do that. But luckily I kept my mouth shut. And we swam into this place. As many things happened that way, didn't they? How could all the resources have been there, and the people, and the love, and the challenge, and the willingness to sit through that many meetings, and try to reconnect after we disagree, or even had some serious arguments a few times. All the relationships survived, as far as I know, as we bumped our way along the edges of the creek, home to San Suiji Temple. And it's a place for us to do serious practice as lay people. We don't anticipate anyone ever living here or practicing a full-time monastic schedule. Although there's a nice apartment building next door. Should we get that? That'll be the next generation's project, don't worry. After we're safely in the ground, they can think about that. So what does it mean to do this, What does it mean? I think we're just discovering as we go. We know some of the ingredients are clear, right? Regular Zazen practice is clear. We've talked a little bit the last few weeks about, that the ritual isn't just a nice cultural add-on, it's equally an expression of Buddha and generates the positive energy of our practice and our way. And in the end, I actually kind of wonder, to answer Ken's question with a non-answer, I actually kind of wonder how much it matters, If you end up with life circumstances with a career and children and all that complicated stuff, or you end up with life circumstances where you wear robes all day and the bell rings, you get up and sit, you still bring in a human person to the middle of it all, working through the same kind of stuff, just with different circumstances. If anything, it might be lay practice is harder because we got to create our own structure, In the monastery, you don't decide whether to go to the temple on Wednesday night, If you're lying in bed, someone comes and knocks on your door and says, "Yeah, you're going," We could do that for each other. It's possible, But maybe not. And the other thing too is I think it's really worth remembering that however Zen expresses in so many different ways. Here's one of them, Much more modest sitting groups happen. People practice on their own. Some people, their main Zen practice is reading the books. That's okay. And some people are right now full-time at places like Tassajara and Green Gulch. Some people live there for years and help take care of the running of the place. Sidebar, a little twisted trick of all this that it took me quite a while to notice is, actually, if you're one of the longer term residents in one of these beautiful monastic places where you just follow the schedule, actually your life ends up more like a layperson. Because then you got to go to meetings, make decisions, manage budgets, and handle the interface with the bigger world, right? So it gets a little more tangled when you really think about it. But then you can sell the new students on the beautiful myth of monastic life, so that's all good. Just follow the schedule. When the bell rings, stop work. Unless you got to fill out the taxes for the community, you got to finish them, right? So anyway, maybe that's enough musing by me. Thank you all for inhabiting this practice period in exactly the way you did, including all the ways you think you didn't do it right. Those are the holes in the basket, right? We have them. But they're the perfect holes. And maybe our basket is actually just slowly, without our hardly noticing it, gradually reweaving itself little by little over the years. Because there actually are waterproof baskets, that would work. They can hold water. So maybe that's slowly happening. We just don't notice. As Suzuki Roshi said, it might not be apparent in our consciousness. Dogen said that too. That's where he gets pretty much everything he says, straight from Dogen. Just says it in a different way. This afternoon we'll have an important ceremony, which I think we pretty much do once a year at most, if that. Where Ken slides the Shuso seat over to the Buddha seat and responds to all of us as Buddha. And then Ken is both elevated and demoted at the same time after that. The elevation, at least the way we've been doing things, is then he's officially part of the practice leaders group and is doing some teaching under supervision from the fully transmitted teachers. Maybe if we're lucky, he'll start doing some mentorship work. But the other part is he just drops back off the big seat and sits back with everybody else. That's a really important part of it. Yeah. We're not trying to be someone special. And we do have some forms that make it look, at least temporarily, like somebody is special as a way to focus our minds and hearts. But a big part of that practice is letting it go again. Yeah, like you're saying, maybe the best part. The great bodhisattvas you hardly notice, right? They just quietly are taking care of each other and taking care of things. And we could all list a long list of great bodhisattvas that we know. So we continue. May our intentions equally extend every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, and are inexhaustible. The way is unsurpassable. I vow